So let's get into the Nuggets offseason. If the Nuggets had made a move by the time we recorded this show to add a player, we might be talking about the players that we gained. But thus far, we've only lost rotation players. And the most important story of this offseason going into it for the Nuggets was KCP. He ended up declining his player option and he signed with the Orlando Magic. The question I had about KCP and what the front office was trying to do really centers around what feels like a change in the narrative, right? We start off with the end of season press conference. They're asked specifically about KCP and going to the second apron. And by all accounts, on that day, they said, we're willing to go into the second apron, all this stuff. Now, look, any team can say that, any ownership can say that, but they set the expectation that they'd be willing to go into the second apron to retain KCP. As soon as the offseason starts, or even before that, and that's like after the NBA Finals, we're getting all of this news that's like, well, KCP is expected to decline his player option and he's expected to get a lot of interest from other teams. That's not surprising, right? He's one of the best role players that would enter free agency, if not the best role player. And then the stories continue to evolve into, the Nuggets are probably going to lose KCP, all of this stuff. And I'm thinking, like, why? We have his bird rights. We could pay him. It seemed like, okay, we're going to be in the second apron probably, even if we paid KCP like the lowest that we possibly could, which is him accepting his player option, and then maybe we extend him off of that. So I don't see a reason that the number another team is offering him should matter, because we're in the same situation trying to keep him either way. Obviously, more and more stories come out, and eventually he does end up signing with the Orlando Magic. It was a $22 million $22 million a year deal for 3 years. And honestly, that number was right around what I thought the Nuggets should be willing to pay on an annual basis. I didn't think that other teams would be willing to necessarily give him as long-term a deal as we would be, with 3 years kind of being like the end of what another team, in my mind, would be willing to offer. And Orlando was willing to go there. But apparently the Nuggets did not match that number. So was the plan ever to actually keep KCP if they were always this worried about the second apron, as they seem to be whenever they spoke after that end of season presser?
Yeah. So my thinking is that the team could not have they couldn't have wanted to go into the second apron this whole time, is what I'm thinking. Because, like you've pointed out, the option, if KCP wanted to do his player option, he would have opted in at around $15.5 million, and that would have basically taken the Nuggets over the second apron to begin with. So were they going to be happy if KCP took his player option? Like, that's something I'm kind of worried about now. Like, what was the plan if they were going to be in the second apron? Were they going to dump Reggie Jackson's salary anyway? Were they going to try to waive Zeke Naji or get rid of one of the second round picks from last year? There's so many questions I have regarding that. But then you also look at the Clippers, who are kind of doing the same narrative thing as well, where they were going to be in the second apron if they brought back Paul George. And so now they're trying to say, well, the second apron is such a big deal. We didn't really want to get into it. And all the reports are saying that the haggling was over the fourth year, which, I mean, it didn't matter
Doesn't
if you had a
affect your
fourth year.
status, right? Yeah.
Exactly. So you got both of these teams in the same situation where they're trying to save face. I think you can't really, I guess, from their perspective, just outright say, hey, we're not going to go in the second apron. We're not bringing back KCP. Sorry, guys. Like, that's just something I guess their media training isn't going to allow anyway. So
They have media training?
Yeah, it doesn't seem like Calvin really took it seriously sometimes with some of his candor. In
he
his press
skipped some
conferences.
sessions for sure.
Yeah, and you also have KCP's wife denying the reports that the Nuggets even gave an offer that was similar to the 3x66. It's very weird, and I think if the Nuggets wanted to keep him, they could have just beat out the Magic on years. They could have given him 4 years, $80 million,
exactly.
Maybe a little less per year. Maybe even try to backload the contract so that you can maybe sneak under the second apron this year, dumping some salaries. But it seemed like that kind of creative thinking wasn't really in play for them. And now the front office kind of looks bad, and we've lost the fifth starter for nothing, essentially. So
Before we move on to other questions, I was wondering what you think, NBA Chicken, about this idea of losing KCP in favor of flexibility, because I think that's what Calvin Booth would probably point to if we got to ask him a question, like if we got him in a press conference and got to ask him about this KCP move. But we haven't seen those moves come to fruition yet, which makes it even more frustrating. And there's still a chance, but we kind of like can read what the moves are going to be anyways, whether it's Westbrook or someone or Vlatko, whoever it is. And I'm just wondering, I know it's so unknown because like on paper, this doesn't look like the most convincing roster, but do you think like the flexibility we do get, even if they're not super productive, these young players, if they're just giving our starters rest, can it get us into like a top 3 seed still?
I think in some ways the flexibility we have with the younger players will allow for more rest. I think that's going to just be a focus from the coaching staff perspective, I think, going into next season as well. It also will help having a young player that can actually play the five a little bit, along with someone maybe outside of DeAndre Jordan that can play backup center minutes during the season to give Jokic some rest. So, overall, it's also going to be the third year for Christian Brown and Peyton Watson. So that's kind of the year when they players start to kind of put it together and make a little bit more of an impact. So I'm looking for a lot more from them compared to our first round picks from last year and Duran Holmes. But I don't necessarily like banking or putting all our eggs in that basket of internal development. I'd love to see some other signing that's a veteran presence that we can depend on a little more consistently.
I think that a lot of fans contemplated the idea of KCP leaving. Like maybe some, like I could have totally seen like Philadelphia trying to make like a 2-year 60 million, 2-year 70 million, like just overpay because they can, and then just to snatch him away, and then it's just like that's just not feasible for us. After that offseason presser, everything after that in terms of the reports and then any official media appearances were about, it seemed like about prepping everybody for the possibility of him leaving. Okay, so I'm like, okay, they've been preparing for this. But now we're 6 days into free agency and well into the off season, right? But it seems like it feels like there wasn't a solid plan in place, plan B, plan C, etc. Or I don't even know if I should call it a plan B if it looks like the plan was never really to keep KCP in the first place. And I always said, like, the front office can make their jobs a lot easier this summer if they just keep KCP, because the fact that we lost him makes trying to answer the questions about this roster a lot more difficult, because we still have the same needs that we had before we knew we were going to lose KCP: ball handling, backup center. And now we have another question mark, potentially at the wing, although I think we have maybe not too many wings now, but like the right number of wings now that we've lost KCP. But a question about, just a veteran presence on this roster, right? We are, I believe, middle of the pack in the league in terms of average age at the moment anyway. And we still have 4 roster spots to fill. A lot of players have gone off of the free agent market. The cost of losing KCP in particular, you're losing a veteran piece, you're losing potentially a floor spacer who you could have used in certain lineups to help maximize the offensive skills that our young players do have. You're losing a potential tradable contract for a rotation level player. And instead we're left sort of waiting for like the scraps of free agency. I think that the narrative about the second apron reducing your flexibility is somewhat overstated relative to the position that you're in if you lose a player like KCP.
I have to ask though, coming off that point, how are you feeling about Calvin Booth right now? Where are you kind of at with either concern level or just like how are you feeling in general?
I know one of my favorite podcasts, the group chat, always does the DEF CON. I think we're not at like DEF CON 5. I think that's the worst one. I think somewhere in the middle right now. Now, if free agency was over and this is all we had done, we'd be way more alarmed, I think. So I think first of all, he has won a championship. That first year, he kind of threaded the needle getting CB, KCP, and Bruce Brown. I think the last draft and last offseason was where I really just kind of disconnected with him. I really liked the Strother pick, but the Pickett and Tyson picks were like I had just driven for like 7 hours, and I was watching the draft right as I got there, and I almost lost my mind seeing Pickett and Tyson because they were so low on my board. And I had
Ooh.
Colby Jones, Leonard Miller, and a couple other guys ahead of them who have been able to kind of blossom in their first years, even though they were in much smaller roles. But they also did more than Pickett and Tyson because,
Which was play at all.
yeah, they actually played a little bit. And then on top of that, he gave them the guaranteed contracts right away, which I know there was this whole idea of trying to make sure you had manageable salaries because the second apron was coming next year, but it was a little too soon, I thought, with two players that I really didn't anticipate getting much better because they were two of the oldest players in that entire draft cycle. So that was one mistake. And then the Zeke extension, doing that a year early, really has cost them now. That poison pill all of last year, just not being able to trade him. The Nuggets were just able to trade him without the poison pill provision 4 days ago. That's just how long they've been with this albatross of a contract with Zeke's extension. So all of that to say, that was really bad last year, but he's made a very good selection in the draft this year, and now it's about threading the needle again. Will he get maybe Gary Trent Jr. on the tax mid-level, still get Russell Westbrook and Dario Saric on the minimum? That's kind of the one great pathway that remains. It seems very unlikely, but that's one of the reasons I'm not completely out on Calvin yet, because all three of those moves are still in the cards.
Yeah, it was interesting because he was kind of on record saying that if we won last season, it would be like we stole one because he didn't expect to win year after year after year. He was like, we're going to get a couple out of like, a 5-year window or something, or maybe a few. Last year, he didn't seem like that confident that it could happen, but he still knew we'd be in contention. It seems like less likely that we'll be in contention just because of like how we look right now. But do you think he looks at it like this year's the go time because my draft picks are going to pop and we're going to compete? Or is this another like, we got to take another year and the year after that is when we're going to really get the gears going?
Yeah, at least from how he originally spoke, this coming season should be one of those go for it years. This is your second year of these second round picks, Tyson and Pickett, that were your guys that should be blossoming into rotation players at this point. So I think from the timeline of how he's expecting things to go, this year should have been one of those go for it years. And it's not really shaping up that way right now. And I'm not too sure, outside of these free agent moves and trades that are still in the works, I don't know how much better the team can get at this point.
Yeah, he's kind of confident in his guys, and it's just a matter of if he's going to be right on them or not and how ready they are. Are we moving to Reggie now and how low
Yeah.
his value was? Because that was insane.
You mentioned Reggie. That was actually the first domino to fall because that was our first move of the offseason, was dumping Reggie Jackson's salary on the Charlotte Hornets along with 3 second-round picks. A lot of people have tried to speculate about what this move was for, clearing minutes for Jalen Pickett as the backup ball handler potentially, because Malone didn't really play him last year. But honestly, since ruminating on it last Thursday, I really still don't have a good read on the timing of that move, because you can do a salary dump whenever, especially if you're willing to give up 3 second-round picks to do it with a $5 million expiring salary, right? What are your theories about the timing of the Reggie Jackson salary dump?
27th, we make that trade on the second day of the draft. The next day, KCP declines his player option, and then 2 days later, he signs with the Magic. And so there's about a 48-hour window in there where the Nuggets had an additional $5.2 million that they could potentially add to what they could offer KCP. And the salary dump just helped them get a little lower before under the second apron. With that additional money actually being gone, they could have given KCP a 4-year, $80 million contract where they backload the contract so that there's about 16 million on the first year. And that would have been like maybe a couple 100,000 under the second apron. And we would have been able to keep KCP and stay under the second apron because we had cut or basically cut Reggie Jackson's 5.2 million off the salary. So that was my thinking in that time frame. There may have been a potential offer they gave, but like I said, they would have had to backload it that first year if they were just so desperate to try to stay under the second apron for one more year. But it sounds like that's just my thinking. That 48-hour time frame where they might have been negotiating with KCP, they had that extra $5 million to work with. He also didn't have to worry about state income tax in Florida. So there's all kinds of little minutia things that we don't think about in contract negotiations. So that might have been a last-ditch attempt to get KCP back on the roster, and it just didn't work out.
But my question about that is, again, like the salary dump of Reggie to try to get under the second apron could have been done at any point, because you can go over the second apron and then later dump Reggie's salary to get under it if there's a particular thing you want to do under the second apron, right? So that's why the timing still didn't make sense to me. You could say, oh, they were trying to create some kind of cap on what they could offer KCP. It doesn't make sense to be that desperate to make that kind of move if it's just for show. And by that desperate, I mean including 3 second-round picks on a salary dump of a $5 million expiring contract.
Yeah. Before I lambast that trade, I think the one aspect about that in terms of the timing is that the team wouldn't have had access to the tax mid-level of like 5.2 million as
Going
free
into
agency
free
started.
agency.
Right. So they would have only been limited to minimum contracts. And I don't know if there was another target. They were maybe trying to thread the needle, keep KCP, stay under the second apron, right as free agency starts. And they signed someone like D'Anthony Melton, who I thought would be in our tax bracket, but apparently he got like almost 12 million from the Warriors.
Yeah.
But you have guys like Gary Trent Jr.
This
right
was
now.
bad for the middle class of the NBA, but I'm seeing a lot of great contracts for role players over the past week.
Definitely. A lot of centers have gotten paid. A lot of people I thought were going to get, almost all of them just got paid double of what I expected, essentially. I don't think any of them are mad about that.
But I'd been thinking about that too. Like, how is this going to affect every class of player, like the minimum guys, the role player guys, the stars? Where is this going to shift? Teams are having to really pay for those marginal pieces that is going to fulfill a need. And I'm sure they're like, we don't really want to pay this for this specific player in an ideal world, but because we need this, we got to do it, which is good for those players, right? But for other teams like the Nuggets and top heavy teams, you're getting priced out. How much work did you do, NBA Chicken, on like potential Reggie Jackson trades, like trying to like use his salary for something? Did you do that a lot?
Yeah, I had actually put a drafted article together where I'd created some budget tiers. Essentially, if we combine Zeke and Reggie's salary, we'd be at around 14, 15-ish million. And these are the players we can trade for, like Dorian Finney-Smith, Jordan Clarkson, Grant Williams, Cole Anthony, Steven Adams, Wendell Carter, Terrence Mann, Gabe Vincent. That kind of class of player was in that price range. And that's why I thought you attach those two bad salaries, so to speak, with their 2031 first, maybe lottery, top 10, unprotected, potentially, to get a player that caliber. That was kind of the tier I was most interested in, because those looked like players that could be either a fifth starter or a 6-man that could come in and make a difference. But now our budget's way less with just Zeke's 8.8 million. There are players like Ayu Dosunmu, Kenrich Williams, Javon Carter, Davion Mitchell. The list isn't great. Georges Niang, I don't know if he is still with the Sixers or not, but that's just kind of the tier down we've gone with our options on the trade market.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good question, Will, because there's a choice made there when with your theory of they were trying to maybe potentially offer KCP more money while staying under the second apron and get access to the taxpayer mid-level, but the choice is having access to that taxpayer mid-level versus if you can figure out a way to use Reggie's salary as part of like an aggregated salary involving trade, especially if you think there's a high likelihood of KCP leaving and you're going to be under the second apron, in which case you can make that kind of move. So it's almost like that salary dump in the universe that you're describing, where it was to create some room to potentially be able to pay KCP. The Reggie salary dump feels like it didn't take into account KCP leaving, because you would have wanted to have that salary to put together with like a Zeke and another one of the second round picks or something to try to trade for another player. We're going to talk about the main restrictions of the second apron and why it is, if not like, you may not agree with it, but it's understandable that a team would want to avoid those restrictions. But the main one that I was like, this is actually going to be an important blow for how the Nuggets build their roster, is the inability to aggregate multiple contracts and trades. But dumping that salary effectively foreclosed on every option to get somebody that was a sort of six-starter caliber player on the trading market anyway.
And it makes me think if Calvin checked on Reggie's market during last season in the regular season, because now there's stories coming out, and it's speculation. It's not, this isn't official reporting, but that Calvin might have been frustrated that Reggie was getting so much playing time rather over like Pickett or other draft picks or something. And I'm sure Malone was thinking, I got to do this because I want to, he's a vet point guard. And we know we've talked about the Malone and Calvin philosophies and how they might differ. And I'm like, maybe Calvin was just like trying to get rid of Reggie last season. He should have done it when his stock was higher and he was actually playing well if he was just going to dump him in the offseason. It's definitely the biggest kind of blemish on Calvin's offseason right now because it's so bizarre and we haven't done anything.
Well, there's also nothing else. It's just blemish. Like, you don't have anything else.
Exactly. Besides this Holmes draft, which we're going to talk about.
Okay, let's actually talk about the one shining bright star of the offseason for the Nuggets so far was that we got Holmes. And, we had to trade 3 second-round picks to move up for him. But we talked about, situations where teams were maybe too far back, didn't get the picks that they wanted. And it had been widely reported that this was the Nuggets' top target, that there was some kind of promise in place, all of that stuff. Everyone's going to deny everything publicly. But how do you feel about getting Duran as our use of the first round pick?
Yeah, back to that media training stuff. I don't know how that got leaked so widely. It was so widespread. I thought it was fake at one point. Like in my draft guide, I was like, "There's too much noise around this. This is not very typical for it to be this well broadcast." But I guess it was the truth in the end. I think I gave the trade up to get him like an A- because I thought it was just one too many second round picks. We did get to keep the 2025 second, which I was mostly happy about at the time. So I thought that was fine. And then as far as how the board fell, that was about as well as most fans could ask for. Duran falling into the 20s was something I wasn't sure was going to happen. I thought he was maybe a more ready player than Khalil Ware, who went at 17. So once Khalil was off the board, I thought, okay, there's a chance for him to fall a little bit here. And getting in front of the Bucks was very important because he was pretty much the guy they were going to be taking at that pick. So at the end of the day, you can't be too mad about the trade because they got the guy that they wanted, brought him in, and it's going to be exciting. I think there are some misconceptions about Holmes as a player, I think, but I think it's going to be really exciting to have him on the team.
Yeah, really quick, what's your read on like him playing the 4 versus the 5?
That is something I've been more vocal about him playing the 4 than the 5, just because some of the weaknesses in his game are, well, it's really just his frame. If you look at him, he's really thin. It's kind of hard to build on your frame at certain points and stages. He's a bit of an older prospect, so it's not very likely he's going to have like an AD or Giannis bulk up in the next 2-3 years. So at the NBA level, he's kind of physically ready to guard 4s. He has some of that lateral quickness to defend on the perimeter a little better than most, but I think he's going to be solid as a small ball five in the right matchups, being able to defend another small ball five or a really small lineup. He can be very active around the rim as a rim deterrent and can make plays on the perimeter as well. So I think overall he's more of a small ball five to me than a true five, and that's kind of the reason why I've wanted another center in this free agency period.
So you talked about that as being the major misconception about Duran as a player. Are there any other areas of his game that should give fans pause about how he'll be able to contribute immediately on the floor?
Yeah, one of those adjustments a lot of players in his position will have to get used to is his usage rate dropping. In college, they posted him up a lot, kind of an ISO low post work. He's not going to have 10 to 12 seconds to get into his groove and get his shot on a regular basis in the NBA. He's going to have to adapt and be ready for a smaller role. And that smaller role is going to include knocking down outside shots. And you've seen the progression throughout his college career with his outside shooting, but in some regards, some scouts still kind of are iffy on if it's a consistent thing. And I can kind of see where they're coming from with that. The percentage is pretty solid, but the actual amount he's taking isn't that much. So in a smaller role off the bench, he might get 2 to 3 threes a game. And is he going to hit 1 or 2 of those a night? That's kind of what it boils down to for his new role at the NBA level. And turnovers were also a big deal in college. He was a pretty solid live ball passer, but some of his decision making wasn't that great. You'd kind of see some scenarios where he'd get off his feet and then he'd have to make a decision. He's kind of athletic, so he got away with it a little bit in college, but at the NBA level, in his smaller role, he'll probably just be a connective passer more than a heavy on-ball playmaker, so to speak. Those are some of the things I think he'll have to work on. And I think the coaching staff's going to help him with that, and the sets he's a part of and things like that will limit those kinds of mistakes.
And what do you think is the one skill that he'll be able to consistently contribute on a nightly basis, like right away?
Yeah, I think the athleticism in terms of just being a play finisher, a lob threat, we have seen what that looks like with DeAndre Jordan a little bit, but having someone that can do the pick and roll, a pick and pop with whoever the backup center is, or even in some lineups with Jokic, I think it's going to be interesting having him be a vertical threat that we really don't have on the roster outside of Aaron Gordon, who's actually in the rotation a lot. So it'd be nice to continue to have that vertical spacing when Aaron Gordon's brought off the floor. Some of that threat is still going to be on the floor.
Was he your key draft pick that you kind of wanted the Nuggets to draft too, or did you have someone else that you were like hoping they would get?
In my tiers, I had Devin Carter, and Jared McCain as like the Black Swan event. Like somehow one of them tanks in value. It would have been nice to have a really solid backup point guard. I think both of them would have instantly beat out Jalen Pickett and then potentially Reggie Jackson, just with those skills they bring in day one. And then Isaiah Collier was actually the second player on my board behind Holmes on my list or mini board I had before the draft. So Holmes and Collier was kind of like my 1-2, and we got the number one guy. So I was really solid.
We need these young dudes to become contributors and fast. And it's like on paper, it's easy to be skeptical of it because how quickly does that kind of happen in this league? But we kind of saw it with Christian Brown, so it's not totally out of the question. So it's like it's easy to argue both sides. Are you like more on the optimistic side for the bench kind of developing and letting us have a good season next season? Or are you more skeptical of the realistic chances that these people can make a leap?
I'm a little more skeptical. I'm a pretty pessimistic person in general, so I guess that just kind of translates over. When you think about our playoff rotation, it's typically 7 to 8 players at the most. The Nuggets have 4 guys right now that we know we can trust. We have Christian Brown, who I know a lot of people think he can slot right into the KCP role, but there's just this aspect of the playoffs that I think are going to be really hard for him. There's going to be plenty of games where where KCP, I guess, was the guy that was out there spacing the floor, and teams are going to fly out to KCP. They're like, oh my gosh, no, 40% shooter, we got to lock that down. But I think teams are going to be able to pack the paint a little more and just let KCP, I keep saying KCP, CB, Christian Brown, they're going to be like, we're going to let Christian Brown beat us. We'll double yoke in the paint. We're going to sag off Aaron Gordon. We're going to sag off of Christian Brown. And good luck. You better hope those guys make the threes is what I'm thinking. And then the other three guys off the bench right now, I guess it would be Deron Holmes, potentially would be Pickett and Watson. Like, we would need another ball handler, I would think, in the playoffs, even if it's for 10-minute, 8-minute spells. And right now it would be Pickett, I guess. And then Watson, I think, is going to be very important next season. Can he take a bit of an offensive leap? We already know what he can do defensively, but what kind of things can he develop? Can he become a more consistent knockdown shooter from the outside? And then I don't really know who our backup center would be. In our championship run, we had Jeff Green come off the bench. Like, they could kind of play small ball 5, but yeah, that's where I'm kind of bleak about things right now. But we do have an incomplete grade with our offseason because hopefully more moves are on the way.
Yeah. My thing with that is just like I very much believe in every first round pick that Booth has made thus far. Like, they've all shown themselves to at least be regular season rotation players in the NBA. Like, that's a hit, right? When you draft somebody late in the first round and they turn into like a player that you can play every night, that's awesome. But we need them to turn into playoff players. And in particular, we have these very defensively oriented wings. And then we have Julian and Jalen Pickett, right? The issue that I have with the roster so far, besides it just being incomplete, but even looking at last year, is that we didn't have the same level of sort of veteran scaffold that these other young guys could play off of. This is one of the reasons I've wanted a real backup center for that bench, even if we didn't get a backup ball handler. My thoughts have changed as the offseason has gone on. Just having somebody out there who knows how to do like the basic basketball things consistently on a possession by possession basis, in particular a center, someone who can screen, someone who can rebound, someone who can like run pick and roll, right? That has like several years in the NBA and is going to be just like at least solid every night, that will allow the young guys to continue to grow in their impact roles without having to, worry about having to consistently raise their floor, because that's what it means to be a playoff player, especially under Malone, right? Is to be a low mistake, high floor player, like Christian was really his first year. But Christian got to do that as like the 8th man in the rotation. Now he's going to be the 5th man, and I'm not sure that he's ready for providing that level of impact on this team. I think he'll be fine playing with the starters really for the most part. But yeah, I just feel like the roster is really lacking in guys that can help Peyton and Christian just continue to grow in their, like, particularly their offensive games. And it just puts a lot of pressure on them, more than I think really should be applied for second and third year players on a championship contending team. I don't think that this is like the best scenario for them to be trying to develop under. Because I don't know how like freely they're going to be able to play when they're worried about making mistakes all the time, because there's no one on the floor that can sort of be that floor raiser, particularly when Jokic is off, right? Because he's like the greatest floor raiser in the history of the NBA. Well, speaking of our guys, there was a report the same day as the Reggie salary dump that Jamal was expected to be signing a 4-year max extension with the Nuggets. I actually want to just review the wording of this report a little bit. And then on June 27th, Shams went on his, whatever his FanDuel platform is, and talked about how the sides have been negotiating that there will be a deal once the moratorium lifts, which is today on July 6th. Also, depending on Olympic play for Team Canada. So that's weird and vague. After he announced that the deal was forthcoming, he also said that Jamal was one of the best clutch players in the league. We don't have it as of the recording of this show, so I'm like, what's going on here? Who was this report? Which side was this report from? And it seemed like from the Shams report that actually the information feels to me like it came from both sides. But then you get at the end of it, this Jamal is the best clutch player, was one of the best clutch players in the league. It feels very like agent speak. So I'm like, okay, maybe it is the sides have been negotiating and like they're getting, Shams is getting this information from both of them. And yet it's July 6th. We have no announcement as of around noon Pacific of an extension for Jamal.
I think part of the reason it's not too big a deal, in my opinion, is because he's going to be signing a 4-year max. So no matter what happens, there might even be a player option on that 4th year, because I think Jamal will hit 10 years of service. And so he could get out of that player option and then sign an extra max in case he does get an All-NBA or something like that. So I really just expect them to make the signing. Tim Conley's style was to give these contracts a little early and make it a max. If you look at Jokic, Jamal, and MPJ in the past. So I think it's kind of within the culture of the front office to just go ahead and get these done. So I'm not too worried about it. I don't think Jamal is necessarily like trying to go explore free agency next year or something like that. I think both sides will come to an agreement. And he's with Team Canada right now, so I don't know how busy he is and trying to get all of those things worked out, the final dotting of I's and crossing the T's. So maybe that might be part of it.
Grace, do you have any like conspiracy theories about this? Or are you feeling good?
It's just another bullet point of uncertainty about this offseason. The fact that the report was put out there, it seems like from the parties involved, made me think, okay, it's coming sooner than I thought. So now that we're on July 6th, I'm just like, okay, well, you reported this a week ago. Is it coming soon? Or like, what is holding it up? Whereas I wouldn't have even been thinking about it except as something that I expected to happen at some point this summer if that report hadn't happened. So it just feels like, for me personally, and I'm sure for a lot of other fans, every additional bullet point is like another thing that we're not giving the benefit of the doubt on, because they haven't given us a reason so far this offseason to give them the benefit of the doubt with respect to what the plan is, because it feels like there isn't one, especially as other teams are like loading up around them and seem to have a plan. I think it was Ryan Blackburn who said, as of it was either yesterday or Tuesday, 2 days ago, we were one of 2 teams that had not signed a new player.
That will conclude this episode of What's in a Game. We did get to 200 subs, though. We got above 200 subs, which is awesome. So thanks for everyone who subscribed. We hope you continue to subscribe. Next episode is a special one, so look out for that. We're having renowned media member from the Denver Nuggets themselves, Matt Brooks, on, and so that will be fun. And
you gonna check that episode out?
Yes,
Absolutely.
everyone check that out. Before we go though, NBA Chicken, is there anything you want to say or just plug? Or obviously everyone follow his Twitter, and I can't recommend it enough.
Yeah, I have nothing really to shout out. Now that the off season slowly slowing down, I might actually get off Twitter for once in a little bit. But I might have a little article write up summarizing the Nuggets off season, and then probably just take a chill pill for a little while. So yeah, and I'm basically just on Twitter. I do have a YouTube channel, but I haven't posted to it in years. So yeah.
Well, cool. If you decide to, we'll definitely would love to see that. I really enjoy your writing and your articles. It's always very well written and detailed and laid out, and I love the tiers that you do. So it was really fun having you on the episode. Really appreciate it. Massive fan. And yeah, just remember, everybody, to like, subscribe, share this episode, follow us on Twitter, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, wherever you're listening. We really appreciate it. And remember, winning is fun and losing sucks.